Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of Modern Wealth Management by Monon Wealth. I'm your host, Ryan Ruff. In a few moments, I'll be joined really by the stars of our show. That's Mr. Ray Kramer and Darrick Hutchens, managing partners over at Monon Wealth Management. But first, I want to give you a little bit of an idea as to what you can expect on this show, the kinds of stuff that we're going to be talking about in episodes to come, and even what we're going to be chatting about today. You see, honestly, it's in the title, Modern Wealth Management. That is the topic of conversation each and every episode. Luckily, we've got Ray, we've got Darrick with a combined 4 decades worth of experience in the financial sector, and we're going to be tapping into that wealth of experience. We're going to be asking some hard-hitting questions. We're going to get to the bottom of some complex financial topics so that you, our listeners, our viewers, can come away with some strategies, some lessons learned that are going to ultimately help better position you in your finances moving forward. I'm going to go ahead and bring on Darrick and Ray. Darrick, Ray, good to see you guys. Thanks for being here. Good to see you. Welcome aboard.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. We're excited to be here. Like you said, the inaugural episode. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, so guys, we've got a great topic here for our viewers and our listeners today. One that is most certainly applicable to anybody, regardless of their wealth. One of the things I did want to touch on here at the top of the show is that you guys have a really interesting background in that you work with a wide variety of clients. And I mean clients that have net worths that are all over the place. But specifically with this show, one thing that we really want to hit on is that you guys have some experience working with what we call the super rich or the super affluent. So I'm talking about a net worth of maybe $500 million or more. So if you're sitting there at home, you're watching this, you're listening, you're thinking, hey, I don't fall into that income bracket. Well, don't worry. There are still lessons to be learned about how the super rich or how the super affluent are allocating their funds, are protecting their funds that you can still apply to your own portfolio. You don't have to be in that bracket as well. And that's one of the beauties of this show moving forward. So guys, when we're looking, to start today's conversation and dive into the topic at hand today, I was trying to think about, over my coffee this morning, what's the best way to start this off? And it came down to one word, uncertainty, I think is the easiest way to put it. You guys want to talk about uncertainty? Just take a look at the last year between the COVID-19 pandemic and everything that threw into not just the market, but everybody's personal lives. Follow that up with the 2020 presidential election. We had no idea which way that was going to go. And now the COVID-19 vaccine rollout program. So much uncertainty in every one of those 3 elements I just listed. People are keeping their dollars and cents close to their chest. They don't want to make any risky decisions given that level of uncertainty. There's just a lot to consider these days. So let's go ahead and start today's conversation around that word of uncertainty. Let's talk about what people can be doing right now to protect their money and give them peace of mind about their finances and the future. Darrick, you want to start us off? What can they be doing right now?
Yeah, well, everything that you hit on there, I have to agree with Ryan. It's been a very challenging last 18 months, I would say, and with everything that's been going on politically, socially, economically, we really have been recommending that people, what we call stress test their situation or their financial plan. And a stress test is a process that looks at what you have and what you want. And it really ensures, Ryan, that there's no disconnects or, in this world, missed opportunities to connect you from, like I said, where you are now and really where you want to go. You mentioned the super rich, and while Ray and I may not have any clients that fall into that 500 million and above, we belong to some mastermind classes, and we talk to some other advisors, and we learn from the processes, the techniques, the strategies that these individuals use, because they really have access to things that, quite frankly, until recently had never been brought down to us with less affluence than them. So when we talk about stress tests, historically, we really, this is a technique that's been used by the extremely wealthy families, but they're becoming increasingly popular with us less affluent individuals and families.
Roger that. So it really sounds like this whole stress testing process is obviously a great thing to consider, and it's something that the super rich are commonly doing. You know, this isn't just a one and done kind of process, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But you know, it's the process is surrounding, the idea of trying not to make any serious mistakes, trying to avoid any potential setbacks, and position yourself on the right track to move forward. So let's dive into the process a little bit. Why is this so valuable? And why should affluent families be considering this right now, especially given, like I had mentioned, with that uncertainty, with everything going on in our world? Why is that, Darrick?
Well, again, I'm going to go back to the fact that with everything that's going on economically, politically, socially, things are moving fast. And what we find is that people don't want to make mistakes, but they also, Ryan, they don't want to miss opportunities. With all the changes that are taking place, there are tremendous financial opportunities that exist right now that, quite frankly, just weren't available before this COVID pandemic. What we find is that this stress testing process, it's a good option for people who are in a complex situation or who just want to make sure that they're making smart decisions in today's challenging environment. The process is particularly important with everything that's going on. As we said, many people are concerned about their finances, and getting that second opinion will help provide clarity and peace of mind for all high net worth clients.
Ryan, if I could jump in here. When Darrick and I have been talking a lot about stress testing lately, and what it makes me think of, we think of, the biggest event we've had in our career, which was the recession of 2008, 2009. And what term came out during that time? Stress testing. All the banks that had defaulted. Now they have to routinely go through this stress test to make sure they have enough cash on their balance sheet to make it through another event like that. So when I think of it, I think back to that time, which was a very rough year. I would say last year was probably the second worst year compared to that. But taking it to a personal level so that when things do get choppy, we can lean back on that stress test to say, okay, everything's going to be okay because we've done the stress test.
Right, right. So, guys, what I'm hearing here is that stress testing can be used to ultimately evaluate a few different things. Yes, at the end of the day, this is your dollars and cents. These are cold, hard numbers on a spreadsheet, but it sounds like there's a little more to it. So could you maybe share like 3 of the main ways that this process can be utilized as a whole?
Yeah, sure. So, it really starts off by individuals that want to test their existing plan to see if it's still on target to deliver the expected results. So the number one way is that we see is, hey, I've got a plan, I've got some goals. Is the plan going to help me hit those goals? Is it going to work? That's number one. Number 2 is that we find people who are considering a potential product, solution, a strategy, and they want to see how it will work in different scenarios. Ray said, Ray showed how the stress test as it relates to bank stress test. We all know that most scenarios work pretty good under ideal circumstances. What we want to see is, will this plan work when it really gets tough, when it really gets stressed? So, taking a look at potential products and solutions, that's the number two way. And then the third thing is just to see if there are any opportunities that people have overlooked that could either enhance or improve upon an existing strategy. Too often we think about dire circumstances and huge mistakes. I think that some of the things we're finding today are opportunities, missed opportunities that we're bringing to people's attention.
Well, it sounds like versatility is a nice little word that comes to mind when it comes to the stress test, because there's a handful of different elements at play given this? I mean, you just named three very different ways that this can be utilized, three very effective ways that can, position you mentally for any given outcome, whether, like you said, Darrick, dire circumstances. Yeah, we want to be prepared for dire circumstances, but also every circumstance isn't going to be dire. So we got to make sure we're prepared for the other stuff as well. So it sounds like a really robust system. So let's talk examples. Let's get into it. So do you guys have an example for me? And this could be real life or maybe even a hypothetical one at that, of why someone was prompted to come in, to Monon, sit down with you guys for a stress test. Were they worried about anything in particular? Walk me through that process.
We find the majority of people that are coming in for stress tests right now are concerned that whether it be estate planning, taxes, or income planning that they've done in the past is no longer relevant. And let's talk about all three of those things. Estate planning has changed significantly. When I started in the business, my first year of production, which was year 2000, the federal estate exclusion was under $700,000. Okay, and any amount over that was subject to up to 40% federal estate tax. Here we are 21 years later, and the exclusion is now closer to $11.5 million per individual. That is a huge change. So, and I was looking at the statistics this morning, Ryan, and the charts, and and how that has progressed over my career. So quite frankly, if you're a high net worth individual and you put your estate planning together 10 years ago, it's out of date. It doesn't even make sense anymore. The laws have changed so much. And what else, and what's happening now? Well, there's talk about it going backwards, it moving back to where we came from. So estate planning and making sure that your family doesn't pay more in federal estate taxes than what you have to right now has been the number one reason people have been coming into us. The second highest reason is that because of all the economic change that we've seen a lot of people retiring early, a lot of people being relocated, or their jobs being eliminated. At the same time, we see interest rates lower than they've ever been, okay? And so we have a huge issue as it relates to people taking early retirement in a low income interest environment. And Ray, you've got a great story about how a client of yours came in, was considering one of these moves, and through a stress test. Why don't you tell them how that played out?
Sure. When Darrick and I meet with people, everybody's got their big issue. Some people aren't sure if they have enough money to retire. Some people are just unorganized. Some people need an estate plan. But I always think about this one client. It's kind of seared into my brain. And every day when I get up, I think of them, and it reminds me of why I do this. This gentleman and his wife, he had worked at the same company for probably 40 years. They moved around the country a lot when he was younger. But Indianapolis had become home, and they had been here the last 15 or so years. And suddenly he lost his job in town. One of his biggest clients was a grocery store that went under. And he was faced with, okay, do I find another job in town? Do I stay with the same company? And ultimately, they were on the verge of moving out west. And the wife came to me privately and said, this isn't what I want to do. Okay. He's not here. Can we talk off the record? I want to stay. This is home. This is where the kids and the grandkids are, but he's earlier than he thought he would be able to retire. So what I did with her was really dive into the stress test and figure out how do we convince him to not make this move across the country and to also be, mentally okay with the idea that he doesn't have to work to age 65 or 66. And at the time he was around just over 60 years old. So by doing the stress test, it became abundantly clear that the only reason to continue to work was his own sense that he needed to work because he's worked his whole life. And the concept of using his own money to retire just was very foreign to him. So we eventually brought him back in, walked through the stress test, showing him, hey, you can keep working all you want. She doesn't want to move across the country. Let's try retirement out. If it doesn't work, you can always go back. And they would take him back. So the stress test allowed them to try it. And here we are almost 3 years later. He's thrilled. He's actually doing some day trading on the side, has become his new hobby. She's happy. And, that's the kind of difference we can make. It's not just about, well, how much money do I need to retire? It's about how much you plan to spend. It's what's on your to-do list. I don't like calling it a bucket list. I call it the fun list. Whatever fun is for retirement, that's what we want to focus on, because Darrick and I have both seen over the years that people push things off, say, well, I'm just going to work a few more years. I want to get to where I get Medicare. Well, okay, Darrick and I run our own business. We pay our own health insurance. If you have the money to bridge from 62 to 65, waiting to Medicare should not be the reason that you're working an extra 3 years. Go out and enjoy yourself while you're young and you have your health. And we've seen over and over, by pushing it off even 2 to 3 years, sometimes that you don't make it that long, even if you're perfectly healthy at the time. So, that's one example that really sits in my memory because it was so impactful and, I think changed, gave them 3 extra years of happiness and staying in town and not moving across country.
Ray, that's a fantastic example, man. You hit the nail on the head in terms of my question of what would have prompted somebody to come in for that stress test. Well, they were facing a massive life change in moving potentially across the country, away from friends and family. For those that may be listening, watching, who have maybe done that process, it's taxing. It's tough. You miss your friends and family and you want to be back there if you do move. So that was a massive life change. You helped them figure out and avoid ultimately. But then, adding in the element of retirement, something they didn't even consider. So this is a great example for a multitude of reasons, but most importantly, they came to you with an issue. You stress tested it and you found that, hey, not only do we get to avoid that issue, but also I've got something better, for you. And that's retirement, because your numbers are here. They're in front of us. We've tested them. We've played the dire circumstances. We've played the minor circumstances, and you can actually do this. This is a real thing that can happen. So that's a great example there, Ray. So thanks for sharing that. But I want to kind of pivot here, guys, now to maybe a different example of sorts where, let's say you had a client, and again, this could be real or hypothetical, where somebody came in, you guys conducted a stress test, and you really helped them from making a mistake, or you even saved them from, some financial stress or circumstance that was kind of coming to them. Do you have any sort of example like that? Darrick, I'll throw this one over to you.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm going to use a real life example, a case that we're working on right now with one of our favorite clients. And, she had done some estate planning several years ago. And as it relates to her and just about everybody else, things change. And her life is significantly different today than it was 10 years ago when that planning took place. There's different people in her life, and the people that are in her life have different meaning to her. And so when we were conducting a stress test, and we conduct stress tests, I do want to say this, on our existing clients, okay, as it relates to different things. It's not just new clients or new perspective. We're constantly re-stressing and re-evaluating the situation. And, one of the things is that, Ryan, we get a chance to get to know our clients really, really well. As a matter of fact, that's a prerequisite of becoming one of our clients, is that we have to feel that we've got a connection with you. And there's something we're going to talk about here, I think, hopefully today, and we call it the human element. And the human element of the relationship is that we really, really understand what it is that you're trying to do. Okay. Our industry is full of jargons and technical analysis and all this, but at the end of the day, what it really comes down to is people taking care of themselves and other people. Okay. And it's all about that human element. And as it relates to this particular case, I just knew from talking with her that what she really wanted was no longer expressed in writing as it related to her estate planning documents. And in bringing that to her attention, we've gone through a series of tests and strategies to get that better in line. And so now, as she, like I said, life has changed significantly. She now has documents and an estate plan that really express her true wishes, not the wishes of some lawyer that she worked with 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because at the end of the day, you're right, Darrick. You hit the nail on the head. It is a bit of the human element, if you will, that can come into play here. So that being said, Darrick, quick second question for you. What would you say are some of the keys of having a stress test done well?
Well, I'd say, listen, number one is adequate and fantastic profiling. And what I just said is we got to understand who a client is and what it is that they want. Okay, so that takes time. The right questions have to be asked, and we really have to turn on our listening skills and our empathy to really collect those data points. The second thing that is absolutely required is you got to have the correct resources to get this done. Ray and I have been in this business now for 40 years, and there isn't a day that goes by that we don't learn something new. All right. And so I say that because you've got to have the right resources in people and technology and contacts to both evaluate and then address the situation. And not everybody has that. And then the third thing that absolutely is a requirement is that human element that we've talked about.
Right. So I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into this idea of the human element, because when you say it, sure, it makes total sense. Yes, this is a world of financial acumen and data analysis, and you can really get bogged down with the numbers and focus solely on that. And we're going to cover that. We're going to get into this topic even further in future episodes of this show.
Okay.
But I'd love to hit it here now. You mentioned the human element being that important variable in stress testing. Could you talk maybe a little bit more of why or how, rather, maybe you guys get to the heart of that human element during your stress testing process?
Well, sometimes it is true that mistakes that we find through a stress testing process are mechanical. We find ages incorrect, date of birth, strategies that are no longer IRS compliant. We do find those kind of mechanical mistakes. But more often than not, the mistakes that we find have to do with this human element. And the human element is that personal and emotional side of the planning. It's the part of the planning that involves understanding everything and everyone that's important to the client and how they will be affected by these financial decisions. The complex, or the strategies and the stuff that we put together, we don't want it to be super complicated. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than what it absolutely has to be to get the job done. what we want to make sure that that it's all about results, and that you as a client are getting the results that you really, really want.
Right.
Ryan,
yeah,
if I could
absolutely.
jump
No,
in here.
Ray, I was just going to say, hey, this human element really, this whole variable was exactly the example that you had mentioned earlier. You had to sit down, evaluate a complex time in that client's life, get to the heart of the human element within that conversation. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it was just like,
No.
hey, this is exactly what we just covered, in terms of your example.
Well, I'd like to highlight something Darrick touched on, because he touched on a few very good things. But I think first and foremost, it's listening and the profile process. Darrick and I spent the first 3/4 of our career working in corporate America, working in private banks. And our job was to sell people things. Okay. At the time we thought, yeah, we're advisors and we're making an impact. And there were several times throughout our career where the push would be to do financial planning or stress testing. But to do that, you've got to take time. Okay. And that environment was not set up to take time with a client. If I ran an appointment or Darrick ran an appointment and we didn't sell something that first appointment, we were failures. Okay. But what did we really do? All we did was provide a product that met their risk tolerance. It didn't change their life. It didn't impact their life at all. It seems if we could go back 10 years and tell Ray and Darrick at the time that we wouldn't collect signatures on a first appointment, I would have said you were crazy. But the first appointment, and Darrick also touched on this, is an introduction. And our job is to sit there and listen and to find what's important in the human element to them. Everybody's different. And what's also interesting is a lot of times we get a husband and a wife in there and we start asking these questions. And it's not just about money. It's about their family. It's about their friends. It's about philanthropy. Money is actually the last section we get to when we first meet a client. And at that point, we kind of get the back and forth of, okay, do we want to work with you and do you want to work with us? But it's through listening and not pushing our agenda on them where the magic happens. And again, a lot of times a husband and wife come in and they might think in their head, yeah, we got the same idea of retirement. And then they sit down and a third party asks these questions, and it could not be more different. I joke all the time. My ideal retirement is buying about 1,000 acres in the middle of nowhere and being left alone. And my wife would like to live in the penthouse downtown. We're going to have to figure out, where the in-between is. And I think having us, there listening, we almost become, that third party. It's not emotional to us. It's emotional to them. And what I've learned in the 22 years of doing this is one of the worst things that can happen is people get emotional about their money and make decisions with those emotions not held in check. And a lot of times I feel like we are the calming presence to make sure that the stress test and everything moves forward according to their goals.
Oh, Ray, I love that. Listening, such a big part of that, because at the end of the day, I'm the client. I come in to sit down and talk to you guys. We're here to talk about me. We're here to talk about me and my issues, my problems, my circumstances, and how you guys can help me through it. So I love that that's a key element, and especially that you had mentioned the money conversation almost comes last, because there are so many other variables, like we touched on with the human element. There are other things to consider, family, goals, you name it, that all do, whether you like it or not, play a role in this ultimate conversation. So let's get into that process a little bit, guys. It seems obviously like knowing the client's goals, what they want to achieve with their life, their retirement plans, it's all critical. It's all very important to consider in this process. So how do you really get in there to the heart of the client's goals and values to understand what's important to them specifically?
We have a process that we follow, and we should, Ryan, if you could pull up that graphic.
Yep, absolutely.
Stress testing, we've covered that, it's an effective way to confirm whether a particular approach, product or service is right for an individual. And it really starts with the profiling of that family or the individual to determine the goals. And we use a set of questions that cover primarily your values, what your goals are, what your relationships, your most important relationships. And then of course we have to get into the facts and figures, but as Ray says, that comes secondary. We want to, the second part is really to evaluate the existing or the proposed services and products, those things for which we are stress testing by working the assumptions, evaluating the alignment with the goals, and of course, calculating what the cost structure of that is. We want to address, the third aspect, we want to address any alternative services or products. So this number 2 and number 3, we're really using all those resources that I told you about. These are the professional contacts that we've made, the software that we use. We're using all of that to evaluate and then address some alternative services or products. And then, of course, number 4 would be that we recommend some course of action. And that course of action may be stay the course. You're doing a great job. You're using everything that is appropriate and best in class for your situation. It may be, hey, you're using the right stuff, but the people implementing it aren't doing what they should be doing. Or it could be that, hey, your stuff is outdated and we need to rethink this. So the course of action could really vary to it's going perfect to we need to make a change.
Sure. That's a pretty robust system and process that you've got to really unpack everything. It starts with the profiling, that initial meeting, like Ray had touched on, getting to the heart of the client's goals and everything. And, working your way down through that graphic that we put our screen on leads you guys ultimately to developing a robust strategy and system moving forward that keeps the client's goals in mind. It's really, I hate to, recycle this word, but robust system that you guys have with the stress testing process. So guys, you mentioned how in your mastermind groups that you're working with other people that are in a similar space, but they're working with those super rich, the $500 million net worth or more. Obviously those individuals, those super rich, super affluent families, business owners, they've got a tremendous amount of access to expertise, teams lined up around the corner for them with all the financial acumen you could ever imagine. So that being the case, could you maybe share a lesson or two that can be learned from this group of people, particularly when it comes to the stress testing process? Because, hey, they're doing it too.
They're not only doing it too, they're doing it they're doing it more often than the rest of us. That's the thing I want to emphasize here. They are paying very close attention to their money and the strategies that they're using. And so while certainly their test may be different than our clients, somebody with 500 million probably isn't concerned about retirement income. They're still testing their situation and what that can mean for them. What I think some of the lessons are is that, first and foremost, if you are even slightly unsure about the viability of your wealth management plan and your solutions, then you could benefit from stress testing. That's number 1. Number 2 is that if failing to stress test can lead to much more severe problems down the road, not just for you, but for your loved ones. And then, of course, number 3 is that many times the most significant failings are due to not enough attention being spent on that human element. Often problems result from crossed wires or a client failing to think through what really matters to them and their loved ones.
Sure, I completely understand that. So why don't we do this, guys? Let's play a little game of hypotheticals here. Let's say I'm coming into your office. Take me through what that stress test experience might look like from that client perspective. Like someone like me coming in for the first time, talking to you guys. What are what kinds of questions are you asking them right off the top? Because I know Ray had mentioned, hey, the money conversations, the dollars and cents tend to kind of, we address that towards the end because there's more to the picture. What do some of those initial questions to really start that conversation look like?
That first meeting, we call it the discovery meeting. And hence the name, we're looking to discover what's important to you. And in order to get that, we've got to understand your values, your goals, your most important relationships. That's really where things start. And if you came into our office, Ryan, if we were to spend 90 minutes together, I'm going to guess that 60 of those minutes are going to be spent in that topic, where we're really trying to understand who you are as a person and what's most important to you and who's most important to you. Of course, we will gather and we would ask people to bring in their stuff, right? Their assets, what other advisors or strategies they've been working with, because that's what we're going to be stressing against those values, goals, and relationships. So it really all starts with that discovery meeting and us trying to understand who you are as a person.
Sure. Completely understand that. And now to kind of round out our conversation for the day surrounding stress tests, a good place, I think, to leave it would be, okay, we've done the stress testing process now. Ryan, I'm walking out the door. What kind of analysis or assessment, am I leaving with in the end? What kind of sense of satisfaction ultimately am I leaving with?
Ryan, there was a time, I'm a CFP, and we like those big leather-bound binders with gold leaf and really, make it look like we're really, really smart and we'll give you all the data and all that. That's the way I was trained to do it. I will tell you, I don't know about you, Ryan. I don't want that. Okay. I want you to know that I know the information. I have all those documents, but when I present to you and I give you something to walk away with, I want it to be concise, action-oriented recommendations that really detail, here's what you told me you really want. Here's how I think you should best get it.
Hey, I love that. Concise, simple, especially, that's the whole gist of the show here. We're talking about complex financial topics and we're breaking them down into concise, bite-sized pieces that anyone can understand. So, hey, I can totally relate and understand that process because, hey, at the end of the day, maybe that leather binder isn't the most ideal circumstance because it's more paperwork. It's more things for me to flip through and understand. Honestly, I personally would rather take away, some tidbits from a great conversation. So that's good to know.
Ryan, the name of the show is Modern Wealth Management. Okay. So of the past, I'd give you the leather bound binder with gold leaf,
right,
full of a bunch of information that you probably will never use. The modern approach is, let me just give you the recommendation, show you that I do have the numbers if you want to dive in, and show you the very best way to implement that.
Yeah, love that. Well, guys, here to kind of top off our conversation for the day, any last thoughts? Anything that you think we might have left out off the table in regards to the whole stress testing process? Anything to leave our listeners and our viewers with today?
Ray, I'll let you go.
Yeah, I think that, as Darrick has walked through this, the one thing that as I've been listening and been working side by side with Darrick for, 17 or so years, but, just over our careers, Darrick and I have often talked about what do we say to people that we do for a living? Because if you meet somebody and they say, what do you do? And I say, I'm a financial advisor. That's the quickest way to end a conversation, because the stigma in our industry is that when you do come in, you're going to be hit with a sales pitch. And so when Darrick and I created our company 7 years ago, what we did was, observe our industry and see everything that's done wrong and flipped it on its head. So the vision we have every day is that we want people to be comfortable when they come in. I mean, doing stress testing is stressful for the client, okay? And we want to break that down. And as Darrick said in our discovery meeting, and what would a client expect? Expect to come in and have a detailed conversation, have the numbers with you, but you and I are both going to know if you're going to give me the information after the first part of our conversation. So when we ask people to bring in their financials, oftentimes they're like, whoa, I don't know. I'm just meeting you guys. Well, great. We're not going to dive into it, until an hour in, when you and I both have a good rapport and a good sense of who we are. So I think it's very important to not only point out the listening aspect, but the fact that, this is a serious process and we stick to it. We're not going to bait and switch and have somebody come in and, we said, hey, we're going to have a conversation, and then 10 minutes into it, we're bringing out, packets of information. So we stick to that promise. And I think that's why we've had such good growth over the past few years and the quality of clients that we're attracting.
Roger that. Guys, hey, look, I really appreciate the conversation today. We unpacked a lot with the stress testing process, and something tells me in future episodes we might revert back to it, come back to it in one way, shape, or another. But hey, ultimately, really appreciate it, guys. This was a great first episode and a great topic to hit on. I'm looking forward to the next episode with you guys.
Yeah, us too, Ryan.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, hey, we want to thank you also, our viewers, our listeners, for tuning in here for our inaugural episode today of Modern Wealth Management. We'll be unpacking new topics in episodes to come. We got a great one lined up for you for the next episode. But until then, for Ray Kramer and Darrick Hutchens, I'm Ryan Ruff saying so long, and we'll see you on the next edition of Modern Wealth Management.